have to be the kashrus for myself, for the Torah, take on a custom take on an extra, an extra efficiency in a mitzvah. The Rebbe writes in a letter that eating kosher food in a mahordic way is part of Zika Chavitis, has a direct effect on our attributes, defines our character, defines our attributes. We're going to discuss tonight different types of products, different types of standards that Hashem operate from, so that we as Chassidim can be empowered to make educated and proper choices. The key to living as a Chassid is to find the balance between high standards that we're striving for as a Chassid, at the same time do so in a balanced fashion, in a way that enables us to have what we call to be able to live a balanced life. But based on Hashem and Hashem's help, I hope to be able to shed some light on this subject as it relates to kashrus. There's a story approximately 50 years ago. There was a Chassidish Yid. He was not a Lubavitcher, but he had a connection with Lubavitch. He had the chidus with the Rebbe. And he was a kashrus professional. The Rebbe said to him, we would like him to speak to Neshei Chabad about kashrus. So he said to the Rebbe, what am I going to tell them already? The Rebbe Mishleim meanings are God-fearing women who are religious. What am I going to share with them? So the Rebbe said, the Rebbe gave a fascinating reply, and the Rebbe said, Sie sind Machmir, they're stringent on things they don't have to be stringent upon. And they said, they're also lenient sometimes about things that they should not be lenient about. So kashrus information, kashrus knowledge, clarity leads us to that balance that we're seeking to be able to focus our energies in productive places and also hopefully take down the level of pressure that may be inflicted sometimes and being put in places where they don't have to be put in the first place. This also ties in with the union of Avas Yisrael. I'll share a story that happened with my father, Shalom, and with the Rebbe. My father came to Lubavitch in Tavshachal Beis, 1962, and he was originally introduced to the Rebbe, to Lubavitch, through his Hillel rabbi, who was a Veldesher Rav. He was a Hillel rabbi, not a Lubavitcher Rav, but he was a Frumer Rav, but he did not keep Chol of Yisrael. And my father was in college in Pennsylvania at the time, and so the Rav to Lubavitch, he had a shaykhus with Rabbi Yitzchak Hanoka, Lava Shalom, and they made a connection. Fast forward, my father eventually ended up in 770, became a Lubavitcher Chassid, and then eventually moved back to his place where he went to college in Pennsylvania, and then an uncomfortable situation developed. He was unable to eat in his own rabbi's house because his rabbi did not keep Chol of Yisrael, and he could not eat in his own rabbi's house, and here's the rabbi who was mekarev him. So the Rebbe tracked this story for 2 years by asking Rabbi Ben Klein to see if this rabbi would be baruch, so to speak, if he'd be appeased. And the Rebbe said to him, told Rabbi Klein to tell the rabbi that a person does not have a sense of jealousy or envy for your student or for your child. If you see your child surpasses you in your abilities and your student, it's really your own success. So the Rebbe was telling Rabbi Klein, tell him that Yankel Chanukah's Yiddishkeit, the fact that he went to a higher standard, is your own success. But the rabbi didn't feel fully appeased. And it was not until 2 years later that my mother, Shalom, ended up teaching the rabbi's sons Limudei Kodesh, because they had no chinuch over there. This was a midbar shmama. It was a mamish, a desert when it comes to Yiddishkeit. She was the only from teacher there, so she taught this rabbi's sons Yiddishkeit because my parents were living there. My father was getting his doctorate, and only then did the rabbi feel at ease and feel at peace with the fact that they were there, etc. But the story brings out two fascinating points. Number one, the point that we have to stick to our standards. Our standards are our standards. They're not up for sale. and we keep Chol of Yisrael, and that's just the way it is. But at the same time, the Rebbe was very, very careful to make sure that the Avas Yisrael to another Yid was fully intact, and we can imagine how busy the Rebbe is. The Rebbe was tracking the story for a period of 2 years. Okay, now we're going to talk about Koshwa Standards. What does it mean when we speak about a Koshwa Standard? So I'll give you a mashal. By way of a mashal, we're going to go shopping. We're going to buy ourselves some shoes. We're going on a hike. We want to climb a mountain. We come to the store. We see they sell slippers, they sell sandals, they sell boots, they sell shoes. What are we going to look for? We're going to look for hiking boots because that's going to fit the occasion that we're trying to fill. Somebody can come into the store and buy slippers or buy sandals and have tightness to the store that I bought this product and it doesn't work on the hike. No, the person was foolish. They bought the wrong product. And also, when you go to buy a product, there's different levels of quality. Some products are known for the craftsmanship, they're waterproof, they have all kinds of qualities, they're very durable, thick soles, whatever it is, there's all kinds of qualities available when it comes to shopping. The same is true, beruchni, spiritually speaking. Everything in the physical has its counterpart in the spiritual. When it comes to hechshedim, there are different standards of what's considered going to be acceptable for that particular hechsher, and they're all kosher, if it's a reliable hashgacha, that is. And then there's also different types of products that they certify. So we as consumers have to have a basic level of education and clarity to be able to make informed choices that suit our standard of kashrus. To begin with, in this regard, let's talk about the structure of international hechshedim. International hechshedim, such as the OK, where I work, and the OU, Starke, the Chavke, the CRC Chicago is a little close to that in size. All these hechshedim, their view and their mission statement, if you will, is to certify kosher products all over the world and kosher ingredients all over the world and to provide kosher food for the masses. They're not focused on a particular community per se, because their focus is to provide food for the masses itself. And as such, they will certify products that are not Chol of Yisrael and not Pas Yisrael. And in fact, if you take a dairy product that's certified by a national hashgacha, if it just says an OKD or an OUT or something like that, there's nothing else next to it, guaranteed it's not Chol of Yisrael. Because to make a product Chol of Yisrael is very involved, it's very costly, it requires a lot of mashgichim, it requires a lot of effort, and the company will state so on the label when it is certified as such. Now, National Hechshedim also certify products as Chol of Yisrael and Pas Yisrael at times, and when that happens, it will state so on the label. With Chol of Yisrael, it will always state so on the label. When it comes to Pas Yisrael, often it will say so on the label. Sometimes the companies don't want it stating so on the label, so the hechsher will put that information on the website. Sometimes it works with codes, but there's something out there that will indicate the Pas Yisrael status of the product itself. The hashgacha's responsibility is to label the product accurately. If it's a dairy product, to write dairy, or if it's Chol of Yisrael, to write so. Whatever the status is, it should be written accurately. It's the consumer's responsibility to choose wisely and choose the product that you're looking for, to be educated in this regard. A reliable hashgacha is a hashgacha that is truthful to what it's certifying. Meaning to say that whatever they say they're certifying, they'll stand behind it and they'll do the requisite amount of hashgacha work to be able to support that particular product certification. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the standard that you're looking for. So an example would be a product could be not Chol of Yisrael or not Pas Yisrael. For us as Chassidim, it's a reliable hashgacha, but it's not for us because it's not for our minhag and our custom in terms of how we follow. When the OK certifies products that are Chol of Yisrael, We kosher after non-chol Yisrael fully and treat it as Isser then, and also for koshering from non-chol Yisrael to part, we'll treat it as Isser. Most hechshedim, most national hechshedim follow that system, but as you'll see later, some local vadim will treat non-chol Yisrael in reference to chol Yisrael as heter, and will not always kosher, and I'll discuss that issue later, but it's something we have to be aware of. There's also something called dairy equipment, which is DE. Dairy equipment refers to a product that is manufactured with a par formulation, but manufactured in a hot process on dairy equipment that was not kosher. So it has a bliya, it has an absorption of dairy, but in this case, it's an absorption of dairy that's not cholav Yisrael. So just like we don't eat cholav Yisrael, we also do not eat from products that have a direct absorption from non-cholav Yisrael. So it's also something that Chassidim would not eat. I want to just mention parenthetically, some Litvish Yidden will keep cholav Yisrael, but are not makbid on kelim. It depends on their minhag, and there's some of their poskim have a view on it that's not the same view as Chassidish poskim. The Rebbe told Rabbi Yoslavsky in a Yechidus many years ago, Zeh HaLoshen, Chassidim zenen zeya makbid if pas Yisrael and cholav Yisrael. So by Adas HaChassidim, this is very dear, very special, very precious. I'll share another story that Rabbi Shvei Alav Hashem told me. He said in the 1940s, with regards to bread, there was, I guess this must have been in New York, obviously I wasn't born then, but he said to me that there was one bakery that was Jewish owned, that was Pas Yisrael, had a lot of Jewish workers, and I guess the owner must have been Frum or something that was made Pas Yisrael, but a lot of the workers were not Frum. So someone went over to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and because we're dealing with Jewish workers who were not from, there was a concern about the Ruach Tumah that Shreira B'Yadayim, because they did not wash Negel Wasser in the morning. They said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, maybe it's better that they should eat non-Pas Yisrael bread where the workers are not Jewish, so there's no Ruach Tumah, because there's no Nefesh Elikis that leaves at night. And maybe it's better to have the non-Pas Yisrael rather than have the Pas Yisrael where there's a possibility of having a Ruach Tumah, because the workers did not wash Negel Wasser. So the Frierdiker Rebbe gave an answer. He said, hey, you're worried about a Ruach Tumah, Pas Palter is Tumah Alins, it's Tumah itself. Ruchni is obviously speaking, but the point is it just stresses the way Chassidim look at this in a very precious way. Okay, when it comes to other foods, such as fish, some basic thing I want to share with you. Shulchan Aruch says that when you skin a fish, when you don't have simonim, you don't have fins and scales, you have to have hashgacha tzmid. A yid has to be able to witness it, to verify it, to testify, and ascertain that's a kosher fish. Almost all international hechsherim allow salmon without skin, even without hashgacha tzmid, because the pink color of the flesh is a color that's unique to the salmon family of fish, and that serves as a siman kashrus. Chassidish hechsherim don't follow this. The OK does allow salmon, only salmon without hashgacha tzmid, skinless. We allow that. All other fish we require, if it's skinless, we require hashgacha tzmid. There's at least one other national hashgacha that has a policy with regards to fish that does not suit the diet of us as Chassidim. They allow any fish factory that only handles kosher fish to skin fish, whether it's tuna fish or some other fish. As long as they're only handling kosher fish, they do not require mashgiach tzmidi in such a place. And that's not something that's acceptable to us as Chassidim. So we have to be aware of what the policy of the hechsher is when they're certifying a product. That same hechsher may certify some things with a mashgiach tzmidi on occasion, and it could be written on the label, but ordinarily it would not be mashgiach tzmidi if it doesn't say so on the label itself. Chassidish hechsherim, as a policy, will only certify products that are cholav Yisrael or pas Yisrael. Chassidish hechsherim can be more discriminate about what they're going to certify because they're targeting a much more select and a more limited market. Now, Chassidish hechsherim have the disadvantage that they don't have an elaborate system the way international hashgachas have. All reliable international hashgachas have elaborate computer systems, have very professional staff, and have a very, very large support staff, and they have tremendous knowledge of the industry due to the amount of products they're certifying and the interplay between rabbis. So the good Hasidic Shadim are very well connected to the international hashgachas, getting information. Very often they'll make productions at facilities under hashgacha from an international hashgacha. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about product labels. When shopping in a store, one needs to be careful to read labels carefully. Hashgacha Pratis, about a week and a half ago, I was preparing to go on a kashrus trip. It was late at night, I was upstate, and I was in a Jewish supermarket. And a Yid from Eretz Yisrael comes over to me. I was in the frozen section aisle. He says to me, he picks up an ice cream. He says to me, "Tagili, like, do we eat this?" So I look at the product and I take off my glasses and I see it has a national hashgacha, but it says DE, dairy equipment, in Kish Levana, not the opposite of Kish Levana, he sees very, very small letters. So I said, "No, it's not for us. You're a chassid, I can see, and we don't eat dairy equipment products." So he says, "Oh," so he finds another one with a Hamisha brand. He says to me, he's about to take a very long trip, and he needs some fuel. I'm like, "Oh, that's a good thing." His wife is not watching what he's taking. Took like boxes of ice cream. Anyway, all kidding aside, he knew to ask a question. When he was new to the country, he was visiting the country of America. He was from Eretz Yisrael. So if we travel to another country, we have to ask the local rabbanim or local professionals in kashrus to be able to find out what's what. In America, the FDA does not require any ingredient that goes in at less than 2% in the formulation does not have to be listed on the product label. So reading a label on its own is meaningless from a kashrus perspective, because you can have an ingredient going in there at 1.8, 1.9%, which is higher than shishim. So, meaning it would not be nullified 1 in 60 because the ratio is higher. And you can also have an issue where the product could be manufactured on non-kosher equipment. So just by looking at the labels in and of itself is insufficient, it's not enough. Okay, now we'll talk about kosher sensitive products and raw materials, ingredients. When it comes to kosher sensitive products and raw materials, obviously we need to have a really, really good solid hashgacha. So when it comes to meat, wine, cholak yisrael, many cooked products as well, one should be very careful to ensure that they have a very good hashgacha, that hashgacha meets the standards that you uphold in your home.
Okay.
When it comes to giving hefshedim, there are times when you would eat in somebody's home because the person is a religious person and you trust them and you feel comfortable, but not necessarily is that person equipped to give a hechsher. I'll share another story with you. I got a call from a Chassidish Rav, who was not very well versed in the ways of food manufacturing, and he calls me up. He wanted to make soy sauce with his hashgacha. I take care of a soy sauce company. Soy sauce, real genuine soy sauce, is a fermented product. It takes about 3 to 9 months to make. So he says to me right off the bat, he was under the impression it could be made in one day. He says, Rabbi Hanoka, I want to make soy sauce with my hashgacha. I want it to be mashkiach tamidi from the beginning to the end. And nobody does that, because the soy sauce plants are kosher par, when they're certified properly, kosher par. I've never heard of anybody making the hashgacha tamidis with a mashkiach there all the time. So I said to him, Rebbe, I said it takes 6 to 9 months, or 3 to 9 months to make this. You want the mashkiach to camp out over there? You're going to get him a trailer. So but anyway, a person has to be well versed about what's going on, and the world of food manufacturing is increasingly complex. And therefore, as a consumer, we have to know which hashgachas meet our standard, which don't. And in the Chassidish world of hashgachas, some of them are very good, and some of them are not really equipped to handle the level of complexity that's part of the dynamics that we face. I'm not going to specifically name any hechsher in this forum, but I'm just making you aware that one has to be aware which hashkachas are suitable for their standard. Some products are products that have to be Bishul Yisrael, according to all opinions, are going to be Bishul Yisrael by the certifying hechsher, because the only way to certify it according to halacha would be by making it Bishul Yisrael. But there are some products that there's either a machloikis, there's a difference of opinion whether or not it has to be Bishul Yisrael, cooked by a Jew, or some products which people make them Bishul Yisrael, cooked by a Jew, only l'chumrah, just to be extra stringent. But according to the strict letter of the law, they're not required to be Bishul Yisrael. An example of this would be potato chips. Most national hashkachas will certify potato chips not Bishul Yisrael, because according to the strict letter of the law, it's not required. It is a chumrah. If we certify potato chips, we'll make them Bishul Yisrael. We're stringent about that when we certify it. But most other hechshedim are not stringent about it because according to the strict letter of the law, they have what to rely upon. There are some sensitive ingredients, I'm going to name about 2 or 3 of them, that all national hechshedim, to the best of my knowledge, will use, but Chassidish hechshedim, the good ones, will not use because they're machmer, because in halacha, there's room to be machmer and not certify these products or these ingredients. We'll start with Tartanic Acid, or cream of tartar, which is, in Yiddish would be Weinstein, the dregs of the wine. If it's coming from kosher wine, then it's mehuder. But if it's a non-kosher wine, if it's dried up for 12 months, then it would be considered to be totally yellowish. It's dried like a piece of wood. But the issue is that today they use what's called mechanical drying. They have a process where they can simulate the 12-month effect through mechanical means. So, and that's what the national hechshedim rely upon. Whether or not to say that's exactly the same effect as the 12 months, that's where you get into the whole discussion where the national hechshedim would be lenient and the Chassidish hechshedim would not accept that. Another example would be confectionary's glaze. Confectionary's glaze is used as a shining agent in a lot of candies. It's a secretion from the lac bug. It's mixed in alcohol and it's a very, very thin layer. There's heterim that I mentioned, but the Chassidish hechshedim don't accept this heter. And so products with glaze with a Chassidish hechsher won't always look as shiny because the synthetic glazes do not have that same glance as the confectionary's glaze. Another product which is very difficult to make mehuder is grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil is coming from the grapeseed itself. To make it mehuder, one has to dry the grape skins, the grape seeds themselves, not the skins, the grape seeds themselves, and then you have to wait 12 months, store them, which is expensive, etc. And again, the national hechshedim that are certifying this will go through mechanical drying, and will not have to wait that time period. If somebody needs grapeseed oil for health reasons, obviously that's a factor they should keep in mind. I'm just mentioning that if somebody wants to be aware of that. Other products I'm going to mention now that require a hechsher but are very stable in nature. They're very, very kind of run-of-the-mill. They're often not made on kosher equipment, and it just needs a reliable hashkacha, but there's really nothing to be concerned about. You want to make sure it's parv as a reliable hashkacha. An example of this would be breakfast cereals, dry breakfast cereals. You have to make sure they're parv. Some of them are not, but that's fine if it's parv. Processed nuts also are pretty stable. Soda, not healthy for you, but it's pretty stable. And tea blends. A straight tea that doesn't have a blend in it is pretty simple. Many times would not even require hashkacha. Once it blends, it has other things in it. I've even seen tea blends that are dairy, but that's highly unusual. But generally speaking, tea blends are pretty straightforward. They need a hechsher, but they're generally speaking not made on kosher equipment, so they're more stable in nature. Now I want to talk a little bit about the food service industry. The food service industry is a shem klali, is a general term that refers to stores that sell you prepared food. So that could be a restaurant, a butcher shop, or a caterer. That's a whole other world for itself because there's it operates very differently than manufactured products. Just in general, manufactured products are made with a recipe that's stuck to by the company, and it's highly regulated. In a food service establishment, the chef kind of has a lot more leeway what they cannot do. So it's a basic standard by all international hashgachas that a food service establishment, that would be a restaurant or a caterer, has to have a frum yid present at all times that it's in operation. Especially when it comes to an establishment where cooking is going on and produce and sensitive produce is going on, you must have a frum yid present, and many times they will require mashgiach tamidi just for that itself. They won't even rely on the frum owner. Depending on the setup, and each hechsher has a certain level of standard of what they're going to require. But the basic standard is you have to have a frum yid present in a food service establishment. Now, when it comes to, let's say, an ice cream parlor, it gets a little bit, according to some people, I don't agree with them, but it gets a little tricky. They say, well, if it's an ice cream parlor, there's no cooking going on there, and if it's all chol of Yisrael, what's wrong if the frum owner leaves for a few hours and I'm not worried about them supplementing ingredients? Some Chassidish Hechshedim do allow that, and some of the better ones do not allow that. They have, the ones that allow that have they're within the bounds of halacha, because you have a frum yid who's yotze v'nichnas, is coming and going, but it's not something that's considered to be a high standard. Some of the better Chassidish Hechshedim would require a frum yid, could be the frum owner, to be present in such an operation. Now, with regards to food service establishments, I alluded to this earlier, some local vadim in particular, probably because of the challenges that they face in their outlying communities and limited food choices, they will allow, for example, a pizza shop, they'll allow the pizza shop to serve chol of Yisrael and non-chol of Yisrael at the same time using the same equipment. Let me explain. Let's say they live in a town where they cannot get chol of Yisrael knishes, but they can get chol of Yisrael cheese. So they'll say that the pizza is chol of Yisrael, but the knishes are not chol of Yisrael. They'll tell it to you. But they'll allow both products to be baked in the oven at the same time, which we as Chassid would never allow, because we treat non-chol Yisrael as Isser. We would require koshering afterwards. The local vadim that would allow this are not chas v'sholom trying to trick anybody, but they follow the poskim that say that non-chol Yisrael does not require koshering, there's no Isser b'liya, which we as Chassidim don't follow that opinion. So there's a difference of approach when it comes to how chol Yisrael and non-chol Yisrael is viewed, and we as consumers, as Chassidim, have to be fully versed and aware of that. So before eating in a restaurant, especially when it comes to out-of-town vadim, you have to be very careful to make sure it's an all chol Yisrael establishment, and this way you can protect yourself from that dynamic. Another thing to keep in mind, since we live in the tri-state area, we have the luxury of being able to discriminate. There's many certified restaurants, kosher certified restaurants in this area. Some people have a chumrah and a hidur. They're stringent and they only eat out in establishments that are owned by a frum yid. It's a very nice chumrah to have. So if we live in the tri-state area, we can adopt this chumrah. That's a beautiful thing. All national hechshedim will certify restaurants, even if they're not owned by frum yid, and even if a restaurant is owned by a non-Jew. They'll of course have a mashgiach tamidi, full controls, lock the kitchen up, lock the gas line, etc. But again, if you have a frum yid and you have a mashgiach, it's an extra level of security, which is a very nice thing to keep in mind. Another thing, speaking of restaurants, when it comes to food being ordered from a food service establishment, if it's going to be ordered, make sure that you make it clear that it has to come sealed, double sealed when it's arriving to you. If a frum yid picks up food from a restaurant, they don't have to seal it because it's in the hands of a frum yid. But if it's being sent by a driver who's not frum, or l'havdil if it's not a yid, then you have to make sure it's properly sealed when it comes. Now, we often get questions, what about vegan restaurants, establishments? So, if they're not certified kosher, then you cannot eat there, and they must have a good hechsher because some of the issues you can have in a vegan restaurant would be teloim, bugs, bishul akum, foods that are cooked by a non-Jew. Some vegetables are not edible in the raw state, or you can have wine issues. So it does not avoid all issues by any means. People ask about juice bars. That's a little simpler. It's a cold process. If it's a cold process, you want to make sure there's no fruits or vegetables from Eretz Yisrael. And then you want to make sure they're not juicing anything like grapes, which they often don't because it's expensive. But if you verify that, and you make sure they don't handle those items and it's cold, I think it's acceptable. One can get away with that. Coffee shops, I don't drink coffee, but I know that for those that do, it's an issue. This is something that you see people coming down from the mountains. You can have a gas station not manned by Fromme Yidden, and they'll have a bottle of Chol Yisrael milk because they want to be able to provide for the customers that are going to get gas and buy products there. And you'll see sometimes an open bottle of Chol Yisrael milk. So this is a problem. You could use a closed bottle and be the one to open it, but you cannot use an open bottle of Chol Yisrael milk because there is Hanoka Chalip and there's benefit to swap out the non-Chol Yisrael with the Chol Yisrael for a number of reasons. First of all, non-Chol Yisrael milk is a lot less expensive. Number two, it's a lot more available than the Chol Yisrael counterpart is, and it's a problem, and it has happened before. So just be mindful of this. Okay, now I'll talk a little bit about B'dikas Teloim. I'll start with a story. This is like probably about 40 years ago, or maybe 35 years ago. I'm dating myself, but I was a counselor in the Midwest in a day camp. And back then, it was common to use the DDT pesticide, which has subsequently become illegal in America because it was killing birds and the like. So in those days, many people just relied on the very strong pesticides and did not check things like iceberg lettuce and cabbage. So there was a kosher restaurant on the main drag on the main avenue, and they had a sign in the window, "We don't check our lettuce, don't bug us." But that cannot fly today because, no pun intended, because today the DDT pesticide is not allowed in America, and teloim infestation is a serious issue and has to be dealt with. So the good news is that all Echshedim have published tutorials, some of them have published videos, and veggie guides online. Yoke has a veggie guide online guiding people how to clean vegetables, how to check vegetables. So this is all very helpful. We just have to be mindful that vegetables that are sensitive and highly prone to infestation have to be dealt with. Eating bugs knowingly is a serious issue. It can be up to 7 lavim, and it's a very serious issue. If somebody wants to be able to have an easier time with the matter, because checking bugs is very, very tedious, it's also not that much fun. Another suggestion, which is something that many people do, is they'll juice the product or they'll put it into a smoothie. If you have a smoothie or a juicer that's going to create a very fine blend, you're not going to have pieces more than like the size of a pencil dot, then you could just give them a quick rinse and then you're good to go. So that's another way to do it, and that way you're going to get all the nutrients and you don't have to go through the whole tedious process of checking it. You just give it a quick rinse and that's acceptable. I just want to conclude, and then I'll take some questions. Everything that we do, we need to have siyata d'shmaya, we need to have help from the one above. And when we go about our Koshwa Standards in a way where we're mindful about trying to keep a certain standard that's befitting our situation as Chassidim, then Hashem, of course, will guide us in the right way and we'll have what we need. I also want to stress that we also should be mindful that people living out of from community, let's say they're on shlichus or they're living in a place that does not have a lot of food choices, obviously their They may not be able to take on certain chumras in food because they have limited choices. So that's a different situation. One should be mindful of that as well. The person has to do this, take this in their own way. I'll finish off with a story that a senior shliach told me. He was building a mikveh, and he brought down Rav Zalman Shimon to give a hechsher on the mikveh, and he hosted the Rav in his house. This is probably like 45, 50 years ago. And in the morning, it was in the West Coast. In the morning, the Rav said to the shliach, as he's serving him breakfast, he says, Reb Shmuel Dovid Estes, Reb Shmuel Dovid, meaning Rabbi Yitzchak, who was resident, lived on the West Coast. Does he eat this ingredient? So never the shliach says to me, I had to tell the Rav, this Rabbi Yitzchak would eat, this he wouldn't eat, like I'm going through my food. So the Rav saw that the shliach felt embarrassed. So the Rav says to him, ich wohne in Crown Heights, I live in Crown Heights, and I can get everything at my disposal. Du wohne in Nari Asad, you're living out in the wilderness, loosely translated, and we should be mindful about that as well. That's actually out. Well, I'm not going to comment on it for system, but I heard that some education will allow a community to come and go. Allah will have a right. Just mentioning that feeling is part of one day to allow. If you have a black box in the gas station, so the answer is that demonstration could be done. The best is to tell that it's coming from an urn or urn that's dedicated to black box. So when you come to a restaurant, the very question. But when you go into a restaurant, you have a question. Eat your bread in front of one. Eat the reliable stuff. So it's always valid to ask much deal for us. If they visit checking letters, they think it's really good to come to you. Or is it valid to ask for? Absolutely. It's good for that. It's also so fine. Other thing I want to mention about restaurants. At every restaurant, especially fancy ones, still products that have Parmesan cheese. It's real Parmesan cheese. The 6-hour cheese. Mindful of that. Also, they will find the restaurant. Some restaurants will fry French fries in restaurants, same oil, fry cheese. The Kosher restaurant, the French fries, fry chicken nuggets. The French fries are not really hot. Now, some restaurants may have separate fries. No, just mention it. Don't assume that. That's a valid question. Ask a particular question. That particular question. You're not happy with the answer. So it's perfect. It's a valid question. Be mindful, and time. If you want to make sure something's time, then it's the first time. Also, by the way, some local body will certify holy strong. This is called holy strong, not holy strong. Hey, Mama Shapo in place. Also, the fact how we're going to strong means that fine, people strong, not so strong in this different. But again, I want to stress that actually, here's the two have to see that's what we're that will flow them so that the consumer will become more. Yeah, keep them with your keep the time. Something to do. Some of them have natural food patterns. Yeah, sure. And today, what? You sign with a funny story. I was I was on a trip in Alabama. 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 Birmingham. And back to the middle of nowhere. And back again, just position around only distance of how rabbi, where no point. So, we have some interest. The Messiah can tell you that